Tomorrow, President Trump meets with Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House, with the world waiting on edge to see if Ukraine accepts Russia's proposal for peace.
President Vladimir Putin wants full control of two regions in eastern Ukraine. In exchange, Putin says he'll freeze the front line elsewhere, as long as the U.S. recognizes the land captured by Moscow.
President Trump briefed Zelensky on Russia's offer while speaking on the phone on the way back from his summit with Putin in Alaska. Reports show it was a difficult call, as Zelensky has previously rejected giving up the territory, but the commander-in-chief making it clear that a peace deal needs to be made over a ceasefire.
And Zelensky seemingly agrees, posting in part, "The positions are clear. A real peace must be achieved, one that will be lasting, not just another pause between Russian invasions."
Tomorrow marks his return to the White House since his testy Oval exchange with Trump and Vice President Vance in February. So we've got a map up on the wall, and it's pretty interesting. If you look at the contested region, is that part that is in red and blue, and that's the area that Zelensky does not, his original approach is he does not want to give up that territory. It's very important territory. It's where you have huge coal reserves, you have an industrial base, but you also have, that's what is often called the breadbasket of that part of the world. In dark red, though, is the area that Putin seized in 2014 when Joe Biden was vice president and Barack Obama was president. That has the strategic importance of reaching to the Black Sea, where Sevastopol is, which is where the Russian Navy is based out of. And so if you're going to look at this from the perspective of Vladimir Putin and what his strategic aims are, his aims are to improve his ability to reach Crimea. At present, the only way he can get to his naval base is going across that little peninsula there at the bottom, and he wants a direct land access to that.
But he doesn't need all of those two regions in order to get that.
No, but if you look right there at the top of the Sea of Azov, which is that sea that's above the Black Sea, he can't get to and the area in red, of course, is still contested by internationally, but for all intents and purposes, he has occupied it for over 10 years. So you can't really access it by land. You have to go across a bridge that goes across that little peninsula there at the bottom, and that's what. And right or wrong, Putin invaded, shouldn't have invaded, terrible guy, all that kind of stuff. Right or wrong, that's what he's looking at.
So here's what else he wants. He wants Ukraine to cede, as you mentioned, control of the Donetsk and how do I say that again?
Donetsk.
And then he wants to freeze front lines in Kherson and Zaporizhia. The U.S. he wants the U.S. to recognize Russia's sovereignty over all captured land.
Which would include that land going back to 2014.
Correct. Crimea.
Crimea. Yeah,
Correct.
Exactly.
And this is what Russia concedes: willingness to negotiate over small slivers of Sumy and Kharkiv, regions open to those regions. And then he says he wants them. He was willing to be open to discussing security guarantees for Ukraine.
What's interesting about this is, this looks like on paper a raw deal for Ukraine. If these were two powers at war that were essentially in an actual stalemate by themselves, the kind of obvious secret is Ukraine can't sustain the fight by themselves. But then you hear those same people say that Russia is on the brink of economic disaster if they continue to fight. So maybe it is more of an honest stalemate than you can tell. I guess the question is, what are those security guarantees? If you listen to Putin, he says half the reason he did this to begin with was Ukraine's flirting with NATO. But if I'm Zelensky, and I'm not advocating for this, I'm saying if I'm Zelensky, I'm saying the only way I'm comfortable giving up that much of my territory is to have some sort of security agreement with NATO. And does that mean NATO troops in Ukraine? What does that mean for Zelensky? Obviously, Putin's not going to be happy about that. So it seems like Zelensky's linchpin, which makes sense, is what can you do?
What are my security guarantees?
How can I make sure Russia doesn't do this again?
Right. And my understanding from reading this, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, was Russia saying, or Putin saying, you can have security guarantees, but it didn't say NATO. So there's some sort of other security guarantee. I don't understand that. But
Although there was some reporting in the New York Post last night suggesting that maybe Putin would be open to certain troops in that area, I guess, in the farther northern area of the contested region, which and we have no idea. Putin did not say that publicly. But if that were true, as you point out, that would be like a pretty significant deal for him to accept something like that.
Well, what we do know is that President Trump told Sean Hannity that this is all up to Zelensky. Listen.
There are millions of people killed. I mean, it's the worst thing since I see everyone saying worst since World War II by far. There's nothing even close. But we had a very good meeting today, and I think a lot of points were negotiated on behalf of Ukraine and on behalf of the whole NATO situation, where we're dealing very well with a lot of foreign countries that are great, European countries. Look, as far as I'm concerned, there's no deal until there's a deal. But we did make a lot of progress. We were together almost 3 hours. And it was very extensive, and we agreed on a lot of points. I mean, a lot of points were agreed on. But there's not that much. There's, one or two pretty significant items, but I think they can be reached. Now it's really up to President Zelensky to get it done.
And it is true, and then you listen to people like Chuck Schumer, who are already poo-pooing all of this, saying that this is an unworkable deal and this will never happen. There are people who, you have to deal, like you said, Joey, is this a raw deal for Ukraine? Of course it's a raw deal for Ukraine. But at the end of the day...
Getting invaded was a raw deal for Ukraine.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a war.
Yeah. No, and it sucks. It's
I think
terrible.
the one thing that both Zelensky and Putin would like is a deal that doesn't have them just amassing arms on that border for the future. Because that's just such an expensive thing to have to do for either country.
Yeah.
And that maybe is the biggest role President Trump can play, is if we create this border, here's how we keep peace.
And I think,
by the way, part of it is just where Ukraine is on the map. I mean, it's their fate, right? They're between this giant power and Europe, and
It's
there's
not
sort of
much
this
different than
in
Afghanistan,
between.
really.
And that's just its fate. But, a lot of people...
and again, again, I'm not defending anybody here, but for many years since the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia has rented Sevastopol in the Black Sea from Ukraine, and had access. Obviously, he took Crimea in 2014, at least physically he did. And if you're going to think about it from Putin's perspective, if you suddenly have NATO marching eastward, and then you have people talking about including Ukraine in NATO. You can kind of see why he might be like, actually, if I want to get to my naval base, other than having to take a United flight around the world to get there, then it's gonna be sort of a problem for me. And so that doesn't make him a better person, but it's reality.
One of the most interesting things that happened during this peace summit, if you will, in Anchorage, in Alaska, was that President Trump presented President Putin with a letter from Melania Trump, our First Lady. This is what the letter said, and it's about the children that are, most of them or many of them, orphans who ended up in Ukraine, in Russia, kidnapped. And she wants to speak to that. She says every child shares the same quiet dreams in their heart, whether born randomly into a nation's rustic countryside or a magnificent city center. They dream of love, possibility, and safety from danger. As parents, it's our duty to nurture the next generation's hope. As leaders, the responsibility to sustain our children extends beyond the comfort of a few. In today's world, some children are forced to carry a quiet laughter untouched by the darkness around them, a silent defiance against the forces that could potentially claim their future. Mr. Putin, you can single-handedly restore their melodic laughter.
As what did you call it yesterday? Poetic diplomacy. Yeah. I guess that is poetic diplomacy in its full. I don't know how much that's going to move the needle for Putin. I think President Trump looking him in the face and saying, if you want a deal, bring those kids back, is probably what's going to move the needle for Putin.
What it did also do is raise the awareness. I think there were a lot of Americans who didn't know this was happening.
Yeah.
And so she did shine the light on that.
Yeah.
And she's putting some gentle pressure
Sure.
for this to be part of the deal.
And it's a reminder that from the very beginning, President Trump, every time he talks about this, he talks about the thousands of souls who die every single week in this meat grinder. And he wants that to end. And as you like to point out, blessed are the peacekeepers or peacemakers.
Peacemakers.
Welcome back. Tomorrow, President Trump is set to meet with Ukrainian President Zelensky at the White House as he tries to ink a peace deal between Kyiv and Moscow. Sources telling Fox Trump now supports Putin's push to control the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine and more in exchange for freezing the current front lines. So are we on the brink of a peace deal? Fox News contributor and former CIA station chief Dan Hoffman. He served in Moscow and he joins us now. Dan, going into this meeting, you made the statement that resonated with me. You said this looks a lot more like the beginning than the end of this conversation or reaching this deal. Now we're getting some real details, and those details show not a great deal for Ukraine unless you look at keeping your sovereignty as a country as a great deal. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with you, Joey. Look, I think if I were sitting in the room with President Trump, as I used to back at CIA, brief the White House and on Russia, I spent years trying to see the world through the twisted KGB eyes of Vladimir Putin. I think I would emphasize that Putin wants to assert Russia's primacy in Russia's own self-designated sphere of influence. They want to demonstrate that the United States has limited leverage to influence how things play out in the former Soviet Union in this war in Ukraine. For sure, Putin wants a bad deal for Ukraine. China's watching too, because if China sees that the United States is unable to project force and influence in Europe, then we might not be able to do that in the Pacific as well. That has ramifications for China's threats against Taiwan. So there's a lot at stake here, and I think we best proceed carefully and cautiously.
Is this a situation where there isn't a great point of leverage for the United States? I mean, I look at this and I see, okay, well, Zelensky wants security guarantees. Putin says part of his reasoning for this to begin with was the idea of Ukraine joining NATO. So if Ukraine joining NATO is the linchpin for Putin and security guarantees are the linchpin for Zelensky giving up this land, I guess, peacefully, what is the middle ground? It seems like they're still in a position where they want opposing things.
Yeah, well, look, I don't think Ukraine should or would want to give up land that Russia hasn't even conquered yet. And you know from your service in the military in war zones that if Ukraine were to give up some of that land in the Donbass, it would make Ukraine more vulnerable to future attacks. Vladimir Putin has violated ceasefires in the past. His strategic objective is to overthrow the government of Kyiv and establish a puppet regime. And Putin knows that if he's forcing Ukraine to accede to a bad deal, that will put pressure on Zelensky, will put pressure on Ukraine and their democracy, and might give Putin a chance to run his own information propaganda operations and influence Ukraine's domestic future. So I think that's the concern there.
You brought up China. That's a great transition here. What can President Trump do? It seems like he's juggling two opposing things, and China as well. He's trying to lower tariffs and make a deal. At the same time, if he puts sanctions on Russia, part of that will move into China buying Russian oil.
Yeah, I think we need to look strong. Look, President Biden didn't win a Nobel Peace Prize when he withdrew from Afghanistan so chaotically and damaged his own administration's reputation. The best thing we can do is show China and Russia that we have the strength, the leverage economically, militarily, diplomatically to project force, project power in the world. And ending this war is certainly one way to help us break this axis of dictatorships, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. But we've got to do it the right way with a good deal that serves our interests, not just Ukraine's interests. It's broader than that. Certainly, if Europe were threatened by Putin, that's $1 trillion worth of trade that we enjoy with that continent.
Yeah, Dan, I think the question is, what is the price of peace and who pays it? And I guess we're going to find that out soon enough. Dan Hoffman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.